Zach, I know you're very busy. Now, I got two more questions before letting you go, and I want to talk about your book, which is entitled Forging Peace in Southeast Asia: Insurgencies, Peace Processes, and Reconciliation. Now, for example, let's look at some of the countries in Southeast Asia today. For example, again, Vietnam, and particularly Myanmar, Thailand. Every single country I just mentioned are undergoing some sorts of political shift, particularly the country of Myanmar. Now, help us to understand, what can we say regarding this peace processes or reconciliation happening in countries such as Myanmar? Can we expect the country will be restored back to normal? Because we have seen that military junta took over the government several years ago, and also that caused a greater concern for a lot more countries in Southeast Asia. Even China could not be silent anymore regarding this issue. So help us to understand, what can we expect regarding the country of Myanmar, and how difficult it is today for us to understand the work of peace within this region.
Yeah. Let me start by saying every country in Southeast Asia has had their own internal security challenges. Most of those countries have faced, far greater concerns from communist insurgencies or secessionist insurgencies within their border than external security. And what I did in that book was I studied 3 different countries, and, the bottom line is no government really can defeat a legitimate, broad-based, popular insurgency. At some point, there has to be a negotiated settlement. So I wanted to understand how those settlements happen, what's the secret sauce in making them work, whether domestically, internationally, is it part of a broader socio-political economic transformation of the country, what are the modus vivendi for these peace processes to work? How do rebel groups transition into being political actors? How do you deal with transitional justice? The one country I wanted to cover in that book but did not, because the complexity of it and the time it would have entailed, was of course Myanmar. Myanmar has been at war with itself since its founding in 1948. There has never been a day of peace in Myanmar. Never. They've had communist insurgencies. They've had ethno-linguistic, ethnic armed organizations throughout the border regions of the country fighting. The government has, over time, and mostly under an authoritarian rule, done a very effective job at dividing and conquering these groups. They can go after one group and ease off on one another. They can sign temporary ceasefires. But the military has never had an interest in actually coming to a durable political solution that involves devolution of political and economic powers. There's never been a pathway to autonomy. Now we get to, of course, after a period of democratization, after the 2015 elections in Myanmar, the NLD, and they recently, in November 2020, won by an even larger margin than they had 5 years before. And the military was very concerned that the opposition was getting very close, or not the opposition, the government was getting very close to being able to secure that 75% of votes in parliament to amend the constitution and strip away the military's political and economic powers. And so in February 2021, they staged a coup d'etat. And it's been a disaster for the country, an absolute disaster. The economy contracted 18% in 2021. Half the population now is living under the poverty line. Exports dried up. Foreign investment disappeared. The country is now imposing currency controls because they're in such dire straits. Inflation is soaring. The military is so incompetent when it comes to running the economy. And then, of course, the fact is they're at war with their population. Just in the cities alone, they've killed 4,000 people, 14,000 anti-coup activists have been arrested, 50 people have been tortured to death, at least in government custody. And that doesn't even include the wars against the different ethnic armed organizations, some of which have supported the shadow government, the exiled government known as the National Unity Government, some of which are kind of waiting to see which way the chips land. But right now, the opposition, the NUG, controls around 15% of the country. The ethnic armed organizations control about 35% of the country. So the military's actual control is getting slim. And for the first time, they have to be able to control supply lines in the Bama, the ethnic Burmese heartland that they never used to. You know, they could always fight out in the outer areas, but now they're at war with their own Burmese population, you know, which comprises around 60% of the population. So, you know, it's such a disaster in Myanmar. If we are to have a peace process there, the reality is the NUG has to win. Right? Their official position is that the goal of this revolution, the Spring Revolution, is not just to defeat the military-backed regime, but it's to transform the military's role in society, i.e. not having any political role, sending them back to barracks, but more importantly, turning Myanmar into a federal democratic system where there is considerable devolution of economic and political powers. They have to end these insurgencies. And so that promise of federalism is one of the ways that the NUG has been able to win over the support and active partnership with groups like the Kachin, the Karennis, the Karen National Liberation Army, and possibly the Arakan Army. So without the defeat of the military-backed regime, there is no peace process to talk about in Myanmar.
Zach, I want to wrap up our conversation, again, going back to your book. Now, another keyword that you used as a title, the word is called reconciliation. And also, just now briefly, you touched on the word democracy. And we know today, because the war in Ukraine, that actually served as a reminder how important and crucial it is for every single country on the planet to preserve and protect the value of democracy, and so that where the country can be unified to fight against the unprecedented or unexpected invaders. Now, going back to the word reconciliation, what can we do? So in other words, what can the countries in Southeast Asia, again, such as Burma, such as Vietnam, any other countries, what can they do in a more practical, in a more feasible, realistic way in order to preserve and protect the value of democracy? So in other words, is it to change the ideology of the country, or to change the government, the political system, or it's time for the U.S. to step in to create another intervention so that the country will be put back on the right track? Help us.
That's a huge question. I always come down to this. When you look at the issues of political violence, whether it's just small-scale violence in the streets or political assassination, you kind of ratchet it up all the way to a broad-based insurgency, armed resistance against the government. It always comes down to governance, right? Insurgency is about governance. Political violence is about governance. It's about having voice in the system. It's about being heard. It's about having a sense of efficacy, that your voice matters. And unfortunately, across Southeast Asia, we've seen huge democratic reversals in the past few years. Obviously, Myanmar with a military coup is a case in point. But, in the Philippines, you saw Duterte with his populist presidency and his war on drugs, which led to over 30,000 extrajudicial killings,
That's
right? No rule of law, no oversight, no judicial oversight. This is so deleterious to a functioning democracy. We've seen attacks on free press. We had last year the Nobel Prize winner, Maria Ressa. Why is a journalist from technically a democracy winning a Nobel Prize? We should ask real questions because of the assaults on the media, the weaponization of social media going after journalists. So we've seen attacks on the free press in Malaysia, in Myanmar, in Vietnam, in the Philippines. Governance matters. There's been, unfortunately, after real progress in Malaysia, which in 2018 finally looked like it was getting past its race-based system of politics, that they were going to enter a period of post-sectarianism. Nope, they're right back to it, and some real reversals. Without the free press, without democracy, you get autocrats, and they operate in their own interests. They muzzle the press. They govern for the small group of supporters around them. Growth tends to be concentrated in the hands of the wealthiest part of society. So it's no surprise when you look at Gini coefficients. Southeast Asian countries are amongst the most unequal in the world. This is never good when it comes for long-term political stability and development. And all of these countries have real challenges ahead. It's a competitive global marketplace. And yet the governments are not always making the best decisions or ruling in the name of the people. They tend to be very corrupt and self-serving.
I think, Zach, throughout the entire conversation, there are many significant points that help us to understand regarding this political and economic corruption and across the continent, but also help us to understand, appreciate the important concept of democracy. Now, ladies and gentlemen, I'm speaking to Dr. Zachary Abuza, and Zachary is a professor at the National War College in Washington, D.C., where he focuses on Southeast Asian politics and security issues, including governance, insurgencies, human rights, and many important issues. Of course, that I encourage everyone to check out his book. It's entitled Forging Peace in Southeast Asia, Insurgencies, Peace Processes, and Reconciliation. Now, Zach, thank you so much for taking your time to join the show. It's been a pleasure speaking to you, and we'd love to have you back on the show again as we continue to follow this political and economic changes, not only in Vietnam, but also across the continent. Thank you, sir. Really appreciate your time.